Welcome, everybody. I stood on this stage back in April 2018 and made an announcement about something I was working on, a build tool and dependency manager called Fury. That was April 2018, and we're 18 months down the road, and it's about time I showed you what has happened in that period. So, we only have half an hour. So I'm going to spend most of this talk doing a live coding session where I get to show you Fury in action. And I'm going to jump straight in, let you know what I'm going to do. On my agenda today, I'm going to be starting easy, building a simple Hello World application. I'll add some dependencies to that. I'm going to navigate into dependent builds. Don't worry about what that means yet. I'm then going to fork a dependency. I'm going to show you continuous compilation. I'm going to resolve a dependency conflict. And then I'll show you how to build a more complex project and publish it. That I'm hoping to fit into about 25 minutes. This should all sound like the sort of things you do on a regular basis, or many of these will be things you do on a regular basis with your existing build tooling. Some of these you maybe do less frequently, but hopefully you can see these are all tasks that happen from time to time when developing with Scala. So let's go. I'm going to start by cloning a layer. Now a layer you can think of, and my keyboard has broken. There we are, that's better. A layer you can think of as a collection of projects. And you see here, if I start typing this command, Fury layer clone, I get tab completion on some possible layers. There aren't many yet, I'm still working on them, but let's start with a very basic one, Scala new. And I should have told it where to clone that. And I will put that into a directory called new project, and cd into that. And I'm going to write some sources. There's nothing obvious in here yet. There is actually a file there, but for now, I'm going to make a source directory and edit a very simple Hello World source file. OK, very simple. I can show you a bit about what's going on here. If I ask Fury to show me the modules, it will demonstrate that there is a module called core. This is something we get for free with the Scala/new layer that we cloned, and that module is inside a project, which is just called new project. So we should probably try and build this. If I just type Fury, Fury will go ahead and compile that. So that's done. That is my simple Hello World, but it didn't actually run. So we'd probably like to see the output from that to check that it's actually doing something. Now, in order to do that, I need to change the module type from being a library to an application. What that means is it will have a main method, and as part of the build, we will run that main method. So I'm going to say Fury module update, and you see I'm getting tab completion here. This is useful for everybody to learn Fury and learn what is possible. So I'm going to set the type to an application, and I'm also going to set the main method to helloworld.main. If I run Fury again, it compiles, runs, and there you can see the output is Hello World. All good so far? Now, that's fine for a project with no dependencies, but we'd probably like to include something else as well. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to add another layer to my layer. I'm going to import projects from another layer into my current layer. And that is done with the Fury layer import command. And I'm just going to pick a project almost at random, one of my libraries called Gastronomy, which provides hashes for things like strings. So that layer is going to be called Gastronomy. I'm going to specify the layer with -L, and if I press tab again, I get the option of what that should be. So propensive gastronomy, and I will specify a default schema. Don't worry about that for now. Having done that, I can now ask for the projects that are available in the layer. Now, not only is my new project included here, but all of the ones that are imported through the gastronomy layer are here as well. And I can add a dependency with the command Fury dependency add, and tab completion will offer me various options, including gastronomy core. I should edit the source file to actually use gastronomy, shouldn't I? So let's import gastronomy, and I'm going to digest this hello world string as an SHA-256 checksum, and I want to see that encoded as hex. So that's just a feature of gastronomy. So if I save that, run Fury again, you'll now see that the graph is building some more projects. So I've imported the layer, I've imported gastronomy, I've depended upon gastronomy, and as a consequence, everything that gastronomy depends on needs to be built in order to build gastronomy and then to run my project. There we are, and there is the hex hash of the hello world string. Now, I've got my layer, and I've got the layer I imported. And imagine the scenario where you're depending on a project, and as you saw, we're building that project from source, but we'd like to maybe experiment with changes to that project we depend on. Now, because Fury has all of the sources available, and it has the build definitions available for those projects, it's actually very easy for us from our current context, and when I say current context, this is the root layer which will show this project, it'll show the modules inside that project, to navigate into one of the other layers that we're importing, and treat that as if we're editing it directly. I can do that with Fury layer select, specifying the layer as dot is the root layer, and I want to look at dot/gastronomy. So I run that command. Now, if I list the projects, they've changed. It's like we're now inside the gastronomy layer. I can list the repositories that that layer depends on. So these are the source repositories that are used to provide the source code that is compiled when compiling gastronomy. And I said that I would like to experiment with modifying one of my dependencies. Now, I can do that quite easily with Fury. I can take a repository, specify which one, specify the fork command, and I can take the gastronomy repository and fork it to a local directory, like that. It takes a couple of seconds because it's moving the files there. And if I go to /gastronomy, there is the contents of the gastronomy repository. Now, what I would like to do is try and compile that. So Fury build compile, and I'm going to run that with the watch flag. So that will build everything once again. Actually, I've got the gastronomy project selected at the moment. What I need to do is go back to my main layer, because I'm in the gastronomy layer and I'm building gastronomy. So let's in another window. So I'm going to have one window showing my gastronomy repository, and the other one showing the new project repository. So let's stop that and select the right layer. And let's try running Fury Watch again. So now you can see it's building new project /core. And when it gets to the end, and when it runs it, it will wait for changes. Now, I can change my source/hello.scala file, and that will cause it to do a recompilation. So let's leave this window watching, and let's say that I want to make a change. Let's say that I've decided that I don't like the name encoded for the method that chooses the encoding, and I'd like to call it encode instead. So if I save that now, and then go back over here, recompilation is happening. There is a bug currently with Fury that it doesn't display errors, but I promise there are errors because it hasn't run. Now, this is a problem only with watching compilation. So this is one reason why it's not released yet. So it tried to compile it, it failed, but it's still waiting for changes. If I go back to gastronomy and try and edit this, encoded is a method I want to rename in those 3 places there. So I've modified the sources for gastronomy, and I just save that, and that triggers a new compilation, even though it's a dependent project. And this time we should find that it works successfully. So I've modified both my project and the dependency, and that was really very easy. If I want, I can go back to gastronomy here and commit that change if I wanted to. So let's have a look at something else. Imagine a scenario where we have more than one dependency. It's not an unlikely case. So let's add another layer. Let's import the layer propensive caesura. This is another library of mine in a layer called propensive/caesura. And I want to call that caesura, and I want to use tab completion for the default schema. So I've imported that now, and I'm going to update the module. So I'm going to say Fury dependency add a link to caesura, which is now available to us. So depending on the layer, it doesn't add any dependencies, it just makes those projects available to us. So I've added caesura in, and let's try and build that. And immediately, it tells us there's a problem. Now, there's another, you can call it a user interface bug here, but it's more of a lack of information. It tells us there's a problem, and the problem is that our dependency tree contains references to 2 or more conflicting projects. Now, what's happening here is that both caesura and gastronomy depend on Scala. And I happen to know, and with more information output from Fury, you will be able to tell that the difference between those 2 is that one is using one version of Scala and one is using another. And those builds are written to work with an exact version of Scala, with an exact version of any other dependency they have. And if there's a mismatch, it's something we need to resolve. Now, this is quite a strict rule. Other build tools tend to just silently upgrade when necessary. But Fury encourages the maintenance to happen all the time and tries to make it as easy as possible to do that. And I'll just demonstrate how we can do that. So let's select a layer again. And if I do tab completion here, you can see what layers I have available. Notice that the layers are a path. So from my current layer, dot, I can access /caesura or /gastronomy. And then there is a Scala layer that is imported from each of those. So if I look first at let's look at caesura Scala first. And if I list the schemas, now the schemas you can think of as variations of a build, variations of the definitions of all the projects and all the modules. They can vary in any way you like, but they're intended to be small variations or tweaks for things like targeting different backends or targeting different versions of a compiler. Here, the Scala layer has many different versions of Scala available. And you can see that there's an arrow pointing to Scala 2.12.7. That's the one that Caesura uses. If I were to select the layer gastronomy Scala and run that same command, you'll see that 2.12.8 is being used for gastronomy. So this is the conflict. Now, I contrived this scenario for the purposes of the demo, and when you come to use Fury for real, we'll make it very easy for you to see what those differences are, have a diff of those two variations of this thing called Scala that needed to be resolved, and you'll be able to go straight to the solution. Here, I'm using the knowledge I have to just do the demonstration. So let's try and fix it. So I can select the layer gastronomy, and I'm going to do something in two commands that will later be available in a single command, which is to unimport a layer, and I'm going to unimport Scala, and I'm going to import the layer Scala, give it the name Scala, and specify tab completion will offer me all of the schemas available, 2.12.8. So having done that, I've now modified the layer. So not only can I access the layer, which contains the definition for the build, but I can also change it. So let's select the layer dot and try and run Fury again, and I made a mistake, I think. Let me so that's 2.12.8. And that's still oh, I updated the wrong one. So let's just fix that. And I can run that exact same command again. And that one, hopefully I got it right this time. Run Fury again, and this time it will build. I've just fixed those layers. I've navigated into my dependencies, made the changes I needed to make, navigated back to the root, tried to compile, and there is now no longer a conflict. Now this will work for all sorts of conflicts, not just the wrong version of Scala. It'll work for wrong binaries, mismatched minor versions of smaller dependencies. It's something which is intended to be very easy to do, but it's also something you don't want to have to do too often. So as you'll see in a moment, when you've made a change like that, it's actually going to be very easy to share those changes with other people so they can benefit from that reconciliation. But before I do that, I'm going to show you what a slightly more complicated project would look like. So let's add even more dependencies and show you what a bigger build might be like. And to do that, I'm going to add more layers. Import a layer. Let's import Zio. And what else? Any other projects you like there? Cats? So I've imported more layers. Let's show you the projects in those layers. So we've got a growing set of projects available for us to depend upon. And I'm going to add a dependency on. You see, if I do tab completion on this now, I've got more modules available to me. So let's say Zio core, and these are all being added to my new project. And cats core. And run Fury. And here we are. You can see a build compiling several things in parallel. So there's 4 things going at the moment. The highlighted projects are the ones that are currently compiling. The graph on the left-hand side shows you the relationships between them, what depends upon what. Now, what might be interesting is you can see that cat's core is compiling before cat's kernel has finished. That might seem a little bit strange. In a moment, you'll see that when cat's core starts, new project core, which depends on cat's core, starts before cat's core even finishes. Now, this is functionality provided by Bloop, which offers pipelining that allows the next compilation to start as soon as it's possible to do so, which is often before bytecode has been generated. So the bytecode generation process can carry on after type checking, but for a dependent project to start compilation, all it needs is access to the type-checked information from the previous modules. So that allows us to get more parallelism between builds and makes the build faster. Now you see here that we built Zio from source, from nothing, and we built cat's core, and we built gastronomy, including Magnolia, and if you look carefully, you can see Simulacrum is in there as well. All of these were built in 53 seconds, which I think is quite fast compared to how it would be otherwise. Or if you were just invoking ScalaC on each of these projects, it would be probably several minutes. So that's a new project that I created from scratch. But what about if I want to make available a project that already exists, that's already got a build? Let's try and write a build as fast as possible. I've only got 5 minutes left for a library many people probably use called Monocle. So I'm going to clone a layer. You can import a layer into an existing layer, or you can clone it into a new directory. So I'm going to clone the Scala new project into Monocle. So list the projects there. OK, it's called new project. I probably want to rename that to Monocle. And I can specify the license. Let's make it Apache license and give it a description, which is optics for Scala. So there we are. That's been updated now. I need to depend upon the sources for Monocle. And to do that, I'm going to add a repository. And the repository, I'm going to use this shorthand form of accessing GitHub, which is just gh : and then Julien Truffaut / Monocle, which I believe is correct according to my script. And I needed to give it a name, Monocle. There it is, and it's worked out what that it's tracking the master branch, and that it's pointing at this this commit hash here. So I then need to add those sources to my module, so the module knows what it's going to compile. I'm going to use the source command, Fury source add, and you can see there that it automatically tab completes Monocle, which is the repository I just added, and it's gone and found all of the directories inside Monocle in that current commit hash that contain sources, that Scala sources. And the ones I need happen to be core, JVM, source main Scala, and core shared source main Scala, and that's a bug. Scala 2.12 minus. So this is the source for Scala 2.12 and every earlier version of Scala. List the sources. We've got those three there. We've also got the local source directory, but we're not using that. It doesn't matter. So let's try and build this. Do you think it'll work? No? Me neither. Let's see what happens. OK, so we got errors this time. We got a lot of errors. What are these? OK, it's saying functor is missing, applicative is missing. Can anyone guess what I've forgotten to do? Dependencies. Let's import cats. Cat seems like a good thing to include. And it actually depends upon cats free. So I will add that in there. And while I'm at it, I'll make some other changes that I happen to know are necessary. We need to include a macros module as well. So Monocle has a core module and a macros module. So let's add macros. And that's all I need to do. So the current module is now macros. I can add a dependency on Monocle core. And I need to add some sources to the macros. Source, add Monocle. Now this is inside the macros source, so I think that's what I want. And I know there's one other thing I need to include for this to work, which is that the macros module, believe it or not, uses macros, which means it needs the experimental macros language flag. So I'm going to add a parameter, which we can add here. It'd be nice to have tab completion on this, but we don't yet. But it's not going to be too difficult. So I need to say language experimental.macros. And then I'm going to run that. I've got 45 seconds left, so it's a race against the clock to see if it'll finish in time. Building cat's kernel, simulacrum, it's done. Cat's core is going to be the slowest. So you'll see cat's core building for the rest of the project, even though the things that are downstream of cat's core will start any moment now. Cat's core is quite big. So there we are, cat's free. Cat's free is actually going to overtake cat's core. Look at that. So your dependencies can build slower than your dependents. There we are. Now that built, we get some output from the SBT API. I think we looked on Stack Overflow. Nobody knows why this is happening, but it compiles anyway. This was a successful compilation with some additional output. So we've built Monocle, and that wasn't too hard. And I'd like you to be able to use this Monocle layer now. So I'm going to say Fury layer share, and immediately that gets shared online over IPFS at this hash. So I can give you that hash now. You can then use Fury to access that hash, and you have the Monocle layer that I've just built immediately. Later, I will add some functionality to allow that to be resolved, or to allow a name, like the names you saw me importing on the layers, to resolve to that hash. That's going to be the next step. But if you just want to share a layer with somebody else, share the hash, and they have access to that immediately. So just to finish up, when will Fury be released? This is the question I get asked almost more than anything else. Well, it can be built from source now. You can go online and get a copy of the version you've just seen. Binaries are actually being published, but I'm not really advertising them. You can find them, but they're used mainly for bootstrapping Fury from an older version. Within a month, I'm hoping for it to be feature complete. And by Christmas, I'd like to have release candidates. And those release candidates will continue until it's ready. Now, I'm not going to say it'll be January or February or exactly when. When I'm happy to call it 1.0, I will take one of those release candidates, and it will be released. So I said it's been 18 months since I started on Fury. And there are some thank yous due over this period. I've had a lot of help from Virtus Lab, especially over the last year, from Mirek, Marek, and Tomasz, and also from Krzysztof and Rafał for supporting me in this work. Jakub Kozłowski has been endlessly pressing me to fix certain bugs that are stopping him from building cats, and we got that working a couple of days ago. Justin Kierza at JetBrains did a huge amount of work on getting BSP working with Fury. I didn't even show you that. Sandra Wolf donated members of her team at Growin in Lisbon to help me develop some of the builds. Sam Halliday, you may know, provided some funding for Fury, which was very much appreciated. And none of this could have been possible without Jorge Vicente Cantero at the Scala Center, who developed Bloop, without which Fury simply would not exist. And I also owe thanks to everybody who's encouraged me over the last 18 months or so. It's been the support I've had and the enthusiasm for Fury that's enabled me to push forward with some of the more radical ideas in here. And I hope very soon you'll enjoy using it. And I've overrun. Is there still time for questions?
Yes, I think we still have a few minutes before the lunch break. So the first
there's a question there from Guillaume. Can I take Guillaume's question just here?
Yeah, sure.
So when you're doing this Fury command, you're editing a file in the background.
Yeah. So Guillaume asked, when I'm typing the commands, am I editing a file in the background? Fury is editing a file for me. That file is not meant to be human editable. Think of it a little bit like running SQL commands that modify a database. The file is there, it contains the data in your database, but you're not really meant to edit it. With Fury, you can actually view the files, you can see the content, and it is readable, but it's in a format that's not really designed for editing. That's a deliberate decision. Well, it could be reviewed in a Git pull request, but I'm not advising that. I've got some other solutions for how that process might work. No, not yet. Next Sphere IT. Sorry.
Okay. So yeah, we have some questions here. Is there a way to define the project structure and dependencies as a build file?
This is a similar question. No, there isn't. The means of operating with or interacting with Fury is via the command line only. Think of it as very similar to Git. I made a decision that you interact by making mutations by running commands, and it's designed to be very interactive. I didn't want to parse or have to parse or have a file format that had its own DSL or anything like this. I know that most build tools do this, but it was a very conscious design decision not to do it this way.
Okay, so the next question is, what was your motivation for creating Fury?
I have answered this a couple of times before in past talks. I was angry, basically. I was on a plane from the USA to Europe, and I got up into the air with no internet connection, and I had planned to spend the 8 hours in the air working on Magnolia, another project of mine, and something wasn't working, and I had no way of finding out what it was. I was getting a stack trace when trying to run the build, and I had 8 hours to myself, unable to do the thing I wanted to do, and I decided at that moment to start work on a build tool I'd been thinking of for maybe several years before that. And that turned into Fury. But it was my annoyance at not being able to do the work I wanted to do that spawned this effort.
Okay, so the next question asked by someone called Sadistic Build Tool. Does Fury support incremental compilation?
Fury does support incremental compilation by means of Bloop. You may have noticed that it was rebuilding a lot of things more than you would think would be necessary. That, I believe, is it's either a bug with Bloop or a bug with our interaction with Bloop, and that's something that does need to be fixed. So when you saw me building cats multiple times, those cat sources hadn't changed between any of those compiles, and there is an issue there that we were watching them for about a minute each time. That should be much faster. If I very quickly...
your screen is not visible.
Oh, OK. Right. Well, never mind then. Yeah, if I don't make changes to the build definition, incremental compilation does work quite fast sometimes, but there's certainly some sort of issue where it's compiling stuff that it doesn't need to. It's OK. It's the moment's passed now.
OK. So the next question is, isn't adding dependencies manually too cumbersome? For a dependency with a lot of transitive dependencies, you would need a ton of typing.
No, you don't add the transitive dependencies, you just add the direct dependency, and it pulls in all of the transitive ones. So you saw that I imported cats, but I didn't need to import simulacrum, for example. That's because when someone wrote the cats build and published it, they imported simulacrum, and there's a reference from cats to simulacrum. Maybe simulacrum would even be in its own layer, and they would import that layer. It's entirely recursive down the builds, and you wouldn't need to add many layers. Now I can import a layer. Oh, it's still not displayed, is it? I've added a layer called. No, it's fine. I can explain it much faster. There's a layer called Scala/ecosystem where I've bundled everything together. Now that layer is already fully resolved. All of those potential conflicts, like I had with the mismatched version of Scala, in that layer would be resolved before it can be published. So if the community at large is helping to maintain a Scala/ecosystem layer, that's something that can be published, and if you depend on only that layer, you get all of the projects in that layer, and you know immediately that there's not going to be any conflicts between any of the dependencies amongst them. That makes things a lot easier.
Okay, so next question is, why do we need to introduce the concept of layers? Why not direct dependencies between projects or modules?
So I needed basically 3 different concepts for different things. Dependencies in terms of one source or one module depending on compiled classes from somewhere else. That sort of link is provided by modules, and a module is the unit of compilation. Projects are a conceptual grouping of those, which I think of as the unit of the unit of reconciliation of names to a group of modules. So you would never want to have to resolve modules independently if they conflict. You always want the entire project. So it's a sort of natural grouping. It would typically come from a single repository. A project would come from a single repository, source repository, and would have a single license, for example, a single description. You want a project called Shapeless or Cats. You don't want to have separate entities for each of these things. And then layers are a convenient way of grouping and distributing projects. I mentioned already the ecosystem layer. Now that will probably not define any projects itself directly, but it will collect together a number of different layers and republish them as a single layer containing many projects. That makes it easier to make these projects available for you. So I think of layers as the unit of distribution.
Okay, so I think the last question, because we are almost 10 minutes after our time, is what does Fury replace?
Nothing yet. It remains to be seen, but it provides functionality that in many cases didn't really exist before. It can potentially replace parts of SBT. It can replace parts of other build systems. There's some things it doesn't replace, so I don't intend to make it a fully featured build tool in the same sense that make is, that can run any arbitrary code. I want it to be focused on the JVM. That's not to say it has to be focused on Scala. It can compile Java, it can compile Scala 3, maybe soon it will be able to compile Kotlin. But I don't want to be able to run arbitrary shell commands. That's something for other build tools to handle. And I think I would like to suggest that Fury can be used as part of another build. I use make quite extensively for invoking Fury on projects that need to do more than just compilation and production of a jar file. If I want to build a Docker image, that's something I would put in my make file rather than inside Fury.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions left, but I think we'll just send them to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause for John Preedy.